Who whispers in the dark when the Emperor sleeps? Who counts the sins of the dead while the stars bleed their cold fire across the void? These questions are carved in the minds of those who have gazed upon the Forbidden's archives. Hidden beneath the spires of Terra, for 10 millennia, the Imperium has stood as both cradle and tomb of mankind, a bulwark against horrors too vast for comprehension. Yet within its catacombs lie cells of knowledge so ancient, so profane, that even the highest lords of the administratum fear to speak their names aloud. There, in the shadowed crypts of holy libraries, inked on flesh-thin parchments, are whispers of civilizations annihilated, of gods slain and betrayed, and of technologies that could rend the fabric of the material universe. Every secret bears a price, and the silence of these dark cells is heavier than the hull of 1,000 starships. The first of these dark cells lies beneath a planet no star chart dares acknowledge, its coordinates effaced from all memory. Here, a chapter of the Adeptus Mechanicus once sought the Omnissiah's purest truths, discovering devices older than the Emperor himself. They called them the shards of eternity, crystalline instruments capable of bending causality, of glimpsing futures that had not yet dared to exist. Yet the Mechanicus did not survive their own curiosity. Their monasteries burned from within, their minds trapped in loops of impossible logic, echoes of reason torn asunder. Only the whispers remained, a lattice of forbidden equations that murmur of power and madness. Those who venture near report strange visions, empires rising and falling in seconds, suns collapsing into darkness, and a distant voice calm, indifferent, asking whether humanity deserves to endure. The stars themselves seem to recoil from this cell, as if the universe remembers and wishes it undone. Another dark cell rests in the hushed heart of a world shattered by warp storms. It is a tomb of saints, heretics, and martyrs, each enshrined in stasis beneath cathedrals of black stone. The Imperium knows this place by name, but only the Inquisition dares approach. And even then, their presence is marked by trembling. Within, Forbidden's rites are inscribed in languages no human tongue can speak, recounting the summoning of entities that devour light and memory alike. Pilgrims speak of hearing prayers answered, though their lips are never moved. Some who entered emerged with knowledge that shredded their minds, others never returned. Yet the lure of power is eternal, and whispers promise that the dark cell holds a key, a method to control the warp itself, to command the tides of chaos that forever threaten the Imperium's fragile bones. Faith, courage, and reason are all tested here, and none leave unscathed. Far beyond the known sectors, a space hulk drifts, a drifting cathedral of death and iron. Within its decayed corridors, the remnants of a forgotten space marine chapter slumber, interred by ritual that predates the Horus heresy. Their armor, etched with runes older than Terra, contains codices of battle, strategy, and secrets that could unmake planets. Yet the true horror is not the knowledge but the silence. Time passes differently here. Decades may span seconds, or centuries condense into a heartbeat. Explorers who have entered report glimpses of the warrior's eyes opening, as if their souls still watch the galaxy. The Hulk carries a single warning, etched in a language forgotten even by the Adeptus Astartes. He who awakens the forgotten shall inherit the end of all things. Those brave or foolish enough to linger feel the slow, inevitable pull of the void, where destiny and oblivion are indistinguishable. Beneath the throne world, Terra itself conceals a cell unspoken in codices or lore. The floor beneath the Emperor's palace is riddled with subterranean chambers, sealed from sight and memory, containing artifacts deemed too dangerous for any mortal to touch. Priests whisper of instruments that can map the soul, revealing not only corruption, but potential futures of entire populations. In this place, the Inquisition occasionally sends its most trusted agents, yet none return whole. The air itself tastes of dust and reverence. Each step echoes centuries of suppressed truths. Within these corridors, statues of unknown saints gaze with eyes carved from gemstone, their gaze eternal and unyielding. Here lies the question the Imperium fears. What is the Emperor hiding, and why does he forbid any mortal knowledge of it? The cell's doors remain locked by faith, fear, and the unseen will of the galaxy itself. On a dying moon, cloaked by permanent auroras of psychic energy, another cell endures. It is said that here, psychers communicate with voices older than stars, extracting visions of the Imperium's deepest vulnerabilities. The facility is constructed from living metal, responsive to thought, and hostile to touch. Here, the line between servant and master blurs, and reality bends to the will of those who dare commune with the infinite. Visitors report a sensation of being watched by countless eyes, each one a shard of every soul lost to the warp. The knowledge within promises power over life, death, and the very flow of time, yet no one can emerge without bearing scars upon mind and body. The cell's final secret is never spoken aloud. It waits, patient, as though aware that one day someone will summon the courage to claim it. A desolate hive world hides a cell beneath the streets of ash and bone. Here, heretics of every creed once plotted in secrecy, mapping ways to manipulate the Imperium's bureaucracy and military alike. Their record survived only as charred fragments, yet these fragments pulse with latent intelligence, guiding minds toward forbidden conclusions. Machines abandoned in the ruins continue their grim work, producing constructs of war that obey commands etched in the whispers of the dead. Citizens who wander too close vanish without trace, only to appear in visions of commanders and adepts, speaking truths that break the mind. In this cell, the line between heresy and divine insight is indiscernible. The knowledge contained here could topple worlds, yet its danger keeps even the most daring inquisitors at bay. The city itself seems alive, a sentinel, ensuring the secrets remain shrouded in darkness. Deep within the warp-touched remnants of a shattered forge world, a cell hums with a quiet resonance. Its machines are instruments of prophecy, forging not weapons, but visions of possible futures. Servitors maintain these devices with perfect devotion, their circuits fused with psychic nodes. Those who peer into the instruments see destinies splinter and fracture, empires rise and crumble, and the Emperor's light flicker in ways that terrify and compel. No one fully comprehends the mechanics. Some claim the devices are relics of the Men of Iron, programmed before time itself, carrying agendas long since forgotten. The cell radiates an aura of inevitability. Everything observed is inevitable yet unknowable. Scholars whisper that meddling here risks more than death. It risks the corruption of causality itself, and the subtle bending of the galaxy toward outcomes none can foresee. On a planet scarred by the Blood Crusades, a hidden cell contains the remnants of a chaos-tainted chapter, imprisoned by their own chapter masters. Their battle doctrines, recorded in obsidian tablets, speak of strategies that corrupt the very notion of loyalty and honor. Yet these tablets are more than guidance. They are imbued with psychic resonance, whispers of rebellion that seep into the minds of those nearby. Adeptus Custodes who accidentally glimpse the records experience visions of betrayal, war, and civilizational collapse, even as they attempt to purge their minds. The cell itself resists comprehension, folding space to ensure intruders cannot leave without leaving a part of themselves behind. It is said that this cell holds a fragment of a truth the Imperium cannot bear, that chaos is not outside, but entwined with the Imperium's very soul, waiting, patient, inevitable. In the cold expanse of the Segmentum Obscurus drifts a station abandoned before the age of the Imperium. Its halls are lined with archives of Xenos interaction, treaties broken and honored, and knowledge of enemies long thought extinct. Artificial intelligences still operate, though corrupted, and their holographic records replay fragments of history like ghosts. Explorers report hearing whispers that mimic voices from home, luring them into sections where the floor falls into endless void. The station holds data capable of rewriting human history, detailing alliances and betrayals that could unravel faith and loyalty alike. Those who linger too long vanish, absorbed into the station's living archive, their consciousness etched into data that feeds the II's insatiable curiosity. Here, knowledge is both gift and trap, a reflection of humanity's insatiable desire to know, and the punishment exacted for reaching too far into forbidden realms. A void fortress, drifting between star systems, contains a cell dedicated entirely to the study of psychic parasites. Within its labyrinthine decks, psychers experiment on entities that feed upon thought and memory, cataloging their behaviors in grim compendiums. Those who enter are haunted not only by the entities, but by the knowledge of how intimately they reflect the human condition. The cell's greatest danger is not the monsters themselves, but the truths they reveal, that corruption and purity are illusions, that destiny can be consumed as easily as a meal, and that even the Emperor's will may be mirrored in the hunger of the warp. Visitors leave irrevocably changed, carrying fragments of insight, too terrible to articulate. And yet, the cell hums on, patient, as though aware that one day, its revelations will demand an audience worthy of both awe and terror. In the final hidden cell, beneath the ruins of a cathedral on a world uncharted by astropaths, lies the culmination of all forbidden knowledge, a repository of prophecies never spoken, events yet to unfold, and the intricate lattice of causality under the choking glow of a red sun. The remnants of a once glorious hive writhed beneath layers of soot and prayer. The faithful knelt amidst the ruins, their chants brittle echoes against shattered arches, while unseen forces whispered of failures too vast to be forgiven. Servitors moved with mechanical devotion, carrying censers whose smoke revealed glimpses of horrors past, of wars that had hollowed both body and spirit. Among them, the officers of the Adeptus Arbites cast long, uncertain shadows, their eyes reflecting the strain of maintaining law, where even law itself had grown corrupt. The whispers spoke not only of enemies beyond the stars, but of those within, lords whose devotion had begun to falter, priests whose faith had decayed into ambition. Here, in this cathedral of despair, loyalty and righteousness were no longer absolutes, but fragile constructs, held together by fear, ritual, and the quiet, aching hope that some fragment of honor might yet endure. Beneath the corpse-strewn streets, the darkness of a hidden sub-hive throbbed with secrets. Rebel cells, remnants of heresies long thought crushed, plotted amidst the catacombs, their candles flickering against walls lined with inscriptions that hissed like serpents. Here, the air was heavy with doubt, the kind born not from fear of death, but from the erosion of faith. An Inquisitor's operative, face hidden beneath a hood, traced trembling fingers along symbols that suggested truths more dangerous than heresy itself. Alliances forged in shadows, sacrifices demanded by those who claimed divine guidance, and signs that the Emperor's light did not reach every corner of the Imperium. The operative's mind teetered on the edge of comprehension, each revelation a stone pulled from a wall that had always seemed eternal. And through the darkness, the pulse of the unknown throbbed, suggesting that every betrayal, every act of corruption, was only the beginning. On the deck of a war-torn cruiser drifting through the void, a space marine captain contemplated the fragments of intelligence delivered by psychic channels. The vessel's crew murmured of anomalies in the warp, of fleets that vanished and returned, warped beyond recognition. Even the chapter's own gene seed, once pure and unblemished, showed signs of subtle mutation, a quiet rot that no ritual could wholly cleanse. The captain's hand rested on his bolter, yet his mind wrestled not with foes, but with questions of loyalty. Was obedience to the Emperor enough when those who gave command seemed blind to the decay beneath their feet? As the stars slipped past the observation port, he realized that the war was no longer fought merely with weapons, but within the very hearts and convictions of those who carried them. And the seeds of doubt, once sown, would bloom with slow, inevitable malice. In a cloistered monastery upon a death world, priests burned incense over tomes that had survived countless purges. They whispered of angels who fell not from malice, but from clarity, beings who glimpsed truths too terrible for mortal minds. Shadows of these revelations lingered in the chants, inflecting the melodies with dissonance that unsettled even the most devout acolytes. The prior, his face lined with age and sorrow, recognized in these visions a fracture in the spiritual lattice. The Empire's faith was a vessel, and yet within it stirred heresies unspoken. Young initiates trembled as they felt the weight of forbidden knowledge brush against their souls, sensing that devotion alone might not shield them. Outside, the storm of war continued, yet within these walls, a quieter conflict unfolded, one of conscience, of belief strained to breaking, where every act of piety was shadowed by the knowledge that the true enemy might be invisible and ineffably close. A tribunal of nobles gathered in a fortress world, debating the distribution of resources to a sector under siege. Their discourse, though formal, reeked of subterfuge, of hidden ambitions and alliances that contradicted sacred oaths. Across the table, the representatives of the ecclesiarchy listened in measured silence, noting the subtle lapses of truth in each argument. In private chambers, some whispered of a conspiracy linking supply shortages to deliberate acts of sabotage, an effort to manipulate both military outcomes and the perception of faith. Outside, citizens labored under starvation and siege, oblivious to the slow erosion of order orchestrated in the shadows. Here, the collision of belief and politics became tangible. Piety was currency, loyalty a bargaining chip, and righteousness a mask behind which treachery festered. And in the corridors beyond, hidden observers recorded every gesture, every misstatement, storing them as evidence or leverage for a reckoning that had not yet come. On a devastated battlefield, the air shimmered with psychic residue from 1,000 dying souls. Adeptus Custodes patrolled among shattered banners, their golden armor dulled by ash, scanning for remnants of enemy psychers. They sensed the moral turbulence as sharply as the physical threat. The unspoken question of why victory, when achieved, felt hollow. Survivors whispered of whispers, voices of the fallen urging vengeance, loyalty questioned, devotion twisted by grief. Among them, a chaplain knelt, reciting rites with a tremor in his voice, seeking to anchor faith in a sea of doubt. The ground itself seemed to mourn, carrying the weight of forgotten treaties, broken promises, and the unrecorded sins of countless commanders. Even as they buried the dead, a subtle unease pervaded the ranks, a feeling that the war's outcome was less determined by weaponry than by the faltering convictions of those sworn to uphold the Imperium's immutable law. Within a secret archive hidden beneath the planetary governor's palace, illuminators labored by torchlight. Here, forbidden's histories were catalogued, uprisings erased from official records, reports of heretic lords, and accounts of psychic phenomena dismissed as legend. The archivists knew their work was perilous. Mere knowledge could condemn a soul. Among the scrolls, one volume bore a seal older than the Imperium itself, inscribed with the emblem of a chapter erased from history. Its contents described the subtle corruption of loyalists, strategic manipulations that led entire populations into spiritual and physical ruin, and the deliberate concealment of events that might have altered imperial doctrine. As the archivists deciphered the text, they realized that the Emperor's light, vast as it was, did not illuminate every corner of existence. Somewhere, hidden in plain sight, lay truths capable of undoing entire faiths, and the first whispers of doubt were already taking root. In a fortress monastery on the edge of a warp storm, a squad of battle brothers discovered relics of a chapter thought lost to time. Their interpretations of these relics suggested a schism far deeper than mere rebellion. The strategies, symbols, and recorded prayers revealed an ideological divergence, a vision of the Emperor that conflicted with orthodoxy. The captain contemplated the implications. Loyalty, once absolute, was not universal. Faith was neither static nor monolithic. It fractured and bent under pressure. The relic seemed to pulse with quiet defiance, challenging the dogma the Adeptus Astartes had carried for millennia. Outside, the warp surged with uncanny intensity, mirroring the turmoil within the brothers' hearts. In that moment, the battlefield was as much within as without, and the line between heretic and loyalist blurred to a whisper. One misstep, one misinterpreted ritual, and the consequences could echo across systems yet untouched by war. A cloaked envoy moved through the labyrinthine corridors of a hive council, passing documents that bore the mark of secrecy older than memory. These papers outlined covert operations, including assassination sanctioned under the guise of maintaining faith, manipulation of planetary militias, and the excision of inconvenient truths. The envoy's steps were deliberate, knowing that the revelations contained could unravel not only governments, but the very spiritual cohesion of the Imperium. In the silence of the corridors, the walls seemed to absorb the weight of conscience, reflecting back the grim calculus of duty versus morality. Even the most devout participants began to question whether their acts of obedience were truly righteous or simply tools of power. Outside, the citizens remained unaware, their trust and faith unshaken, yet every step of the envoy suggested that the rod of treachery was closer to the heart of the Imperium than any enemy fleet could ever reach. On a world devastated by centuries of attritional conflict, a young psyker glimpsed visions of futures that might come to pass. Cities burned in one vision, while in another they thrived under authoritarian dogma. Faces of the faithful contorted in agony and bliss, revealing that morality was malleable under the weight of destiny. The psyker's mentor, a seasoned librarian, cautioned that such revelations were dangerous, that knowing the consequences could corrupt even the strongest soul. Yet the visions pressed on, unstoppable, showing betrayals that originated not from outsiders, but from within trusted lords, venerated saints, and even those who claimed to act in the Emperor's will. Doubt seeped into belief, dissolving certainties like smoke. And in the midst of this revelation, a silent scream echoed across the warp, signaling that the first act of treachery had already begun, and that the Empire's foundation might tremble under the weight of truths yet fully understood. Beneath the shattered dome of an imperial cathedral, a conclave of priests discovered a relic unlike any previously catalogued. Its aura defied comprehension, resonating with both faith and a subtle malevolence. When held, the relic projected visions, scenes of lords sacrificing the innocent for power, angels corrupted by their own clarity, and worshippers turning against each other without provocation. The conclave realized that the relic did not merely reveal the past, it suggested possibilities of betrayal yet to occur. Panic threaded through their ranks, yet doctrine demanded silence. Within the shadows, a voice murmured, a tone both familiar and alien, questioning the very nature of devotion. The priests faltered, some falling to their knees, others raising weapons against imagined foes. And as the dome echoed with the sound of unanswered, the void hung like a wound across the galaxy, bleeding cold starlight into systems long abandoned by hope. On a battered cruiser drifting near the Eye of Terror, a captain knelt before a viewport, fingers tracing the etched sigils of his ancestors. His armor bore the scars of 100 campaigns, yet none so deep as the erosion of certainty in his own soul. Around him, the crew murmured prayers that had begun to sound hollow, their voices trembling against the roar of failing reactors. Memories of victories, of worlds saved, now seemed ephemeral, swallowed by a sense of inexorable decline. Even the Emperor's visage, once a source of immutable guidance, felt distant, more myth than presence. In the quiet moments, he imagined the galaxy itself as a cathedral of bones, each planet a tombstone, each star a flicker of faith threatening to go out forever. He whispered a confession to the dying light. Perhaps loyalty was not enough. Amidst the shattered spires of a hive world, priests stumbled through corridors of ash, carrying censers whose smoke revealed fleeting visions of cataclysmic futures. Children of the faithful cowered in shadow, learning lessons of devotion that now seemed meaningless. The air pulsed with psychic resonance from the warp, twisting prayers into incoherent cries. One priest, lips cracked and trembling, saw in the smoke not angels, but the faces of saints who had turned their backs on humanity, leaving nothing but regret behind. Faith, once a weapon, now offered only vulnerability. Devotion became a burden heavier than any armor. As he fell to his knees, he felt the weight of millennia pressing against him, as though the galaxy remembered every failure, every compromise, and expected penitence that none could fully offer. Even in devotion, corruption had seeped through the cracks, and the line between servant and betrayer blurred into a whisper of despair. A solitary psyker drifted through a ruined warp nexus, visions spilling from his mind like fractured starlight. He saw entire sectors consumed by fleets that never existed, wars that had been fought before history recorded them. The voices of the dead clamored in his skull, accusing, pleading, threatening. Each vision tore at his faith, leaving him unsure if obedience to the Emperor was a shield or a lie. As he trembled beneath the oppressive aura of the Nexus, he glimpsed a figure, neither mortal nor demon, smiling with a patience older than time itself. Its gaze stripped away pretense, revealing not only the decay of the Imperium, but also the futility of belief in the face of infinite entropy. The psyker fell to his knees, screaming without sound, as the Nexus fed his mind the unbearable revelation that the foundation of all faith might have been built on lies older than creation itself. On a frozen frontier world, a space marine patrol discovered a tomb untouched by time, its walls etched with inscriptions in a language older than the Emperor's reign. Within lay the remains of warriors who had fought not for glory, nor for the Imperium, but for knowledge deemed too dangerous to survive. Their armor was inlaid with sigils that defied logic, resonating with a psychic power that gnawed at the minds of the living. As the captain studied the etchings, he realized the text suggested a hidden layer to reality itself, a lattice of causality entwined with the fate of humanity. Each symbol whispered of manipulation, of forces shaping the galaxy unseen, and of wars fought to hide a secret buried deep beneath the bones of stars. Loyalty, valor, faith, all were revealed as instruments in a plan far older than the Imperium, and their obedience had been exploited without their knowledge. Deep in the heart of a corrupted forge world, tech priests labored over machines whose purpose was obscured by millennia of ritual. Their servitors moved with mechanical devotion, yet the priests themselves began to doubt, sensing that their guidance came from whispers, not the Omnissiah. The machinery hummed with an alien resonance, producing visions of futures where the Imperium fractured under its own weight, yet also worlds where humanity endured only by renouncing what it once held sacred. The priests' minds wavered, caught between the dictates of faith and the undeniable truth revealed in the machines. Each revelation tore a fragment from their understanding, forcing them to confront the possibility that devotion itself could be a tool of entrapment. And as the resonance reached a crescendo, a psychic pulse revealed a singular chilling truth, that the secrets of creation itself had been manipulated, hidden beneath layers of obedience, and that the galaxy had been complicit in its own subjugation. In a shattered cathedral orbiting a dying sun, the echoes of chants intermingled with the groans of structural collapse. The high clergy, faces gaunt and lined with centuries of caution, debated the significance of omens that defied all precedent. Smoke from ancient incense carried visions of destruction across the nave, angels weeping, saints turning on each other, and entire populations swallowed by invisible forces. One acolyte, trembling beneath the gaze of a fractured halo, saw the contradiction between doctrine and reality, perceiving betrayal in every sacred rite. Faith, she realized, was a fragile lattice, easily fractured by knowledge too deep, too raw for mortal comprehension. And as the sun flickered, signaling the death of a nearby star, the clergy glimpsed a subtle shift, a convergence of revelation and heresy, a moment when understanding and catastrophe intertwined. The cathedral itself seemed to pulse with the weight of concealed truths, awaiting the inevitable reckoning. A void hulk, adrift in uncharted space, carried echoes of battles never recorded. Within its decayed corridors, the remains of a lost Astartes chapter lay in stasis, their armors inscribed with runes that shifted when observed. Explorers who ventured inside reported visions of strategies and conquests that predated the Imperium, and of enemies who had long been forgotten by history. The psychic residue of these warriors spoke not of glory, but of subtle betrayal. Trust manipulated, faith used as leverage, and obedience enforced with the shadow of unseen forces. As the explorers delved deeper, they found inscriptions hinting that even the Emperor's will had been circumvented, his vision interpreted and executed in ways he could not have foreseen. The realization struck like a psychic thunderclap. The galaxy had been subtly guided toward outcomes that benefited something or someone hidden behind the facade of loyalty and righteousness. On a battlefield scarred by centuries of attrition, a lone commissar walked among soldiers whose eyes held the weight of endless campaigns. He observed the quiet muttering, the subtle acts of defiance, the shifting loyalties, and the unspoken bargains made in desperation. His own faith trembled, tested by the persistence of doubt in those he had sworn to judge. As artillery roared and psychic storms ignited above, he glimpsed a vision in the smoke, the Emperor not as a beacon, but as an instrument of manipulation, a distant mind whose intentions were inscrutable even to those who served him most faithfully. The soldiers fell in patterns that suggested orchestration, not chance, and the commissar realized the war was not only fought with bolter and blade, but with trust, with belief, and with the unseen forces that guided hearts and minds toward predetermined ends. Within the hidden libraries of a hive-world governorate, illuminators uncovered codices thought lost to purges. Their pages revealed alliances, betrayals, and manipulations stretching across millennia. Political machinations, carefully concealed, had altered the course of entire sectors, yet they were justified in the name of devotion and order. One archivist, weary and shaken, noticed annotations in the margins, instructions for suppressing knowledge, for erasing events inconvenient to faith, for ensuring that obedience remained unbroken even when truth demanded rebellion. As he read, the weight of centuries pressed upon him, and the galaxy seemed less a realm of stars than a cathedral of lies. Even doctrines that claimed divine inspiration now appeared as tools to channel belief into preordained paths. And beneath it all, an inked note hinted at a revelation so profound that understanding it could fracture the minds of even the most steadfast adherents. A lone psyker, wandering the ruins of a warp-tainted monastery, sensed a presence older than the Imperium. Its psychic voice whispered of secrets buried in the lattice of reality, truths carved into the bones of creation, and manipulations that had shaped humanity since its first fledgling colonies. Each revelation tore at the psyker's mind, yet also illuminated a path of understanding previously unimaginable. He realized that the decay of faith, the corruption of loyalty, and the wars of obedience were not random. They had been engineered, orchestrated by forces that existed beyond the comprehension of mortals, angels, and even the Emperor himself. The implications were unbearable. The galaxy's history, its triumphs and failures, its devotions and betrayals, were all threads woven into a design that no living being had fully grasped. And in that moment, the psyker understood that knowledge alone could not save them. It could only reveal the enormity of what had been hidden. On a throne world high above the mortal courts, the final revelation unfolded. A secret conclave of the Emperor's advisors revealed the existence of an artifact older than Terra itself, a device capable of bending not only matter, but belief, manipulating loyalty and faith across entire sectors. The implications were staggering. The Imperium, its devotion, and its wars had been guided by something neither mortal nor divine, a force that reshaped reality according to incomprehensible design. Those present struggled to comprehend whether the Emperor had known, whether he had been complicit, or whether even he had been deceived. The stars themselves seemed to shiver as the remnants of a shattered fleet drifted toward a contested system. Captains and admirals, weary from centuries of war, weighed decisions whose consequences could span millennia. Each order given carried the ghosts of past mistakes, the silent weight of lives sacrificed in obedience, and the haunting question of whether devotion was now complicity. On the bridge of a cruiser, A lone officer traced the trajectory of planets with trembling fingers, calculating not only the trajectory of weapons, but the fragility of faith. Servitors hummed with ritual precision, unaware of the moral calculus unfolding around them. Beyond the viewport, void erupted into sudden lightning-like bursts of energy from unseen sources, reflecting the tension coiling in the minds of men. Silence hung heavier than steel, and in that pause before the storm, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, knowing that the reckoning was inevitable. Beneath a cathedral world, acolytes and priests moved in reverent ritual, their steps measured and their chants trembling with fear. The incense they burned revealed visions of fallen worlds and shattered loyalties, each wisp curling like a memory of sins long buried. Even as devotion pressed upon them like an unyielding weight, doubt seeped into their hearts. A priest knelt before an altar, his hands bloodied not by sacrifice, but by trembling from inner torment. He whispered confessions for sins he had not yet committed, knowing the Imperium demanded obedience even when understanding faltered. Outside, the wind of distant war carried the cries of the faithful and the screams of the condemned alike, merging into a single unbroken lament. The world itself seemed to bend beneath the strain of expectation and despair, each stone of the cathedral resonating with the cost of loyalty and the fragility of human resolve. On the surface of a decimated forge world, tech priests worked tirelessly, their augmetic limbs moving with mechanical precision while their minds wrestled with revelation. Machines older than history itself hummed with knowledge too vast to comprehend, their purpose obscured by layers of ritual and secrecy. Every adjustment, every calibration, carried the weight of uncounted lives, and the failure of a single operator could unmake a city. Sparks and energy arcs illuminated the grim determination etched into their faces, revealing both devotion and despair. Outside, the ground quaked under orbital bombardments, the rhythm of explosions mirrored in the pulse of their machinery. Even as they labored, psychic whispers clawed at their minds, echoing the sins of previous generations. They understood that their work was not merely construction or repair. It was the maintenance of fragile order, a bulwark against chaos that demanded obedience even when comprehension failed. A lone space marine stood atop a ridge of ash, surveying a battlefield littered with the remnants of entire regiments. His armor, dulled by centuries of engagement, bore the marks of both combat and internal struggle. He felt the weight of his chapter's oaths, and the silent accusation of every life lost under his command. Around him, soldiers moved like shadows, their loyalty tested with every command, every hesitation a reflection of doubt. The sky roared with the fury of orbital bombardment, yet the battlefield held a pregnant calm, the eye of a storm poised to consume all. In the midst of this quiet, the Marine considered the nature of devotion, that it could inspire heroism and yet demand surrender of the self. Each moment stretched into eternity, as if the universe itself paused to witness the final measure of loyalty, the ultimate test before the clash of destiny. On a hive world teetering on collapse, inquisitors moved through corridors filled with whispered treachery, each shadow concealing subtle betrayal. The air hung heavy with incense and fear, masking the metallic scent of spilled blood. Documents seized in secret revealed manipulated militias, orchestrated famines, and acts of devotion twisted into instruments of control. Even as the inquisitors catalogued every sign, they felt the creeping futility of their work. For every conspiracy exposed, another had taken root elsewhere, silent and patient. Citizens preyed unaware, their faith a fragile shield against the encroaching corruption. High above, nobles plotted in chambers of steel and glass, their hands steady, their faces serene, while the weight of countless lives pressed upon them unseen. The city itself seemed to pulse with the consequence of every choice, every betrayal, each step toward righteousness, simultaneously a step toward ruin, and the inquisitors could only move in shadows, preparing for the moment when revelation would demand judgment. Within the psychic maelstrom of a warp storm, a solitary psyker drifted, suspended between reality and madness. He glimpsed fleets erupting and vanishing, entire civilizations reduced to memory, and the faint pulse of manipulation that threaded through the galaxy. Every vision carried the scent of despair and devotion intertwined, of loyalty tested beyond endurance. His hands shook as he reached for the lattice of causality, seeking comprehension, yet finding only deeper layers of predestination. Voices of the dead and unborn merged, whispering accusations, confessions, and warnings. Even as he struggled to maintain control, the storm intensified, bending perception, fracturing time. Each choice, each prayer unanswered, reflected back with amplified resonance, shaping futures not yet realized. And as the fury of psychic energy coiled around him, the psyker understood that the war was no longer fought solely in the material plane. It had become a test of belief, a crucible where the cost of devotion was measured in both flesh and soul. A desolate sector burned under bombardment, its planets scarred and moons shattered. Among the ruins, survivors struggled under orders they barely understood, witnessing the results of obedience and the decay of faith. Commanders grappled with decisions that would fracture morale, each directive a reflection of sins committed and trust betrayed. Servitors executed the will of men who no longer fully comprehended their own loyalty. The sky above reflected the torment of the ground below. Flashes of energy tore across the void, mirroring the psychic fractures tearing through the hearts of soldiers. A chaplain moved among the troops, offering ritual and prayer, his voice trembling under the weight of knowledge that faith alone could not sustain them. Every scream, every death, resonated with history, memory, and the slow erosion of purpose. And as the bombardment continued, the galaxy itself seemed to shudder, poised on the brink of revelation, ready to strike without mercy. Within the ruins of a once sacred monastery, illuminators pored over texts that detailed manipulations of belief across centuries. Their hands, stained with ink and age, trembled as they deciphered passages revealing that faith had been guided, orchestrated, and weaponized in ways no soul should comprehend. Each annotation implied betrayal. Obedience demanded not from devotion but from design, and loyalty itself had been carefully sculpted to channel human effort toward unknown ends. The walls seemed to listen, shadows bending with weight of the truths contained within the pages. Initiates who glanced at the text recoiled, feeling the fragility of their convictions crack under the pressure of knowledge. The monastery itself, once a sanctuary, now pulsed with the echoes of deceit, a subtle resonance reminding all who entered that even devotion had a price. And as the illuminators cataloged these horrors, they realized the galaxy's future was shifting in response, awaiting the final act. On a war-torn frontier, a space marine squad moved with grim purpose, each step measured against memory and duty. The battlefield quaked as orbital cannons fired in silence, each impact sending tremors of psychic resonance through armor and mind alike. Soldiers faltered under the weight of command, their oaths clashing with the reality of failure. A captain, visor reflecting the devastation, realized that their victories had been preordained in ways they could scarcely comprehend, that every maneuver, every sacrifice, had been manipulated by forces unseen. Loyalty had become both weapon and cage, faith a tool wielded by fate itself. Even as they advanced, they sensed the universe recalibrating around each choice, each hesitation, and each act of devotion. The calm before the next barrage stretched into eternity, the galaxy holding its breath as if acknowledging that the next moment would redefine everything, and that the final consequences had not yet been unleashed. A hidden conclave in an orbital spire examined relics older than the Imperium itself. The artifacts pulsed with power that threatened comprehension, their resonance echoing through mind and machine. Scholars whispered of causality, manipulation, and the bending of loyalty across entire systems. Even the Emperor's own will, they realized, might have been interpreted through a lattice of design they could barely perceive. The spire trembled as psychic energy from the artifacts spread outward, subtle yet undeniable, nudging decisions, beliefs, and allegiances. Those present felt the cost of devotion, the burden of obedience. The void ignited in a frenzy of light and fire as fleets collided, tearing the black silence into shards of energy. Stars trembled under the psychic resonance of millions of prayers, prayers that screamed into nothingness, prayers that were answered only by the void itself. On the bridge of a battlecruiser, a commander's hands shook as the reality of fate pressed down like the weight of a collapsing sun. Orders shouted, broken by static fragmented. Explosions tore corridors apart. Servitors fell. Marines roared, bolters firing in rhythms too fast to count, each shot a defiance, each cry a lament. Somewhere, a psyker screamed as visions of infinity shattered into fractal nightmares. Faith became steel and fire, devotion became fury. Every decision split the line between salvation and ruin. And as fleets spiraled, as warp storms surged, a single truth emerged from the chaos. The universe did not forgive, did not forget, and did not yield to those who dared to shape it. On the surface of a hallowed throne world, orbital bombardment fell like the judgment of a god. Cities flattened, spires shattered, and streets became rivers of fire. Amidst the ruins, soldiers of every rank advanced, bolters clenched, eyes reflecting the conflagration above. A chaplain stumbled forward, chanting prayers that seemed to ignite the very air, his voice a fragile bridge between hope and despair. He saw the faces of the faithful and the condemned alike, all etched with the cost of devotion and the memory of choices that could not be undone. A lone space marine fell to one knee, staring at the heavens torn open by energy and fire, feeling the weight of millennia of oaths pressing down. Each act of courage, each sacrifice, each fleeting victory now trembled on the edge of meaning, as though the entire Imperium itself was holding its breath before revelation and ruin collided in a single terrible moment. In the corridors of a shattered cathedral, acolytes moved with trembling precision, carrying censers and relics across stone slick with blood and ash. Every step echoed with centuries of devotion. Every whispered chant carried the weight of faith fractured by war. High above, the heavens cracked open as bolters and psychic energy ignited the skies in a chorus of ruin. Priests watched as the faithful fell, as armor shattered, as lives ended with a sudden quiet inevitability. One acolyte's hands shook as he read from a tome, words etched in a language older than memory, revealing betrayals that had guided generations. Flames lit up murals depicting saints and heroes, their faces now obscured by smoke and decay. And in that moment of convergence, the acolyte understood that devotion itself had been both weapon and cage, that the prayers of millions were woven into the lattice of destiny, shaping a galaxy poised on the edge of revelation and devastation. Within the warp-tainted heart of a battlestorm, a lone psyker clung to sanity, screaming at visions that were both past and yet to come. Time fractured. Ships existed and did not exist. Commanders gave orders both right and impossible, and the cries of the dead intermingled with the war-born prayers of the living. He saw betrayal etched into the flow of causality itself, manipulation stretching across centuries. His mind fractured, rebuilt, fractured again. Every pulse of energy struck as both destruction and illumination. And when he fell to the ground, clutching his head, the vision became unbearable. The war, the faith, the devotion had all been guided, not by justice, not by honor, but by something older, something indifferent, something eternal. He screamed, and in that scream, the universe answered, shifting subtly, irrevocably, as though the lattice of reality itself acknowledged the revelation he bore alone. A space marine company charged across the shattered plains of a world split by psychic storms. Bolters fired, chainswords roared, and the smell of ozone and blood mingled in a hymn of war. Each step was a covenant, each strike a testament, and yet the soldiers felt the weight of unseen hands directing their actions. A captain's helmet reflected the energy of exploding moons. The flashes mirrored the turmoil within his soul. Comrades fell, torn and burned, their sacrifices registering both as triumph and as instruments in a pattern he could barely comprehend. Even as enemies crumbled beneath their advance, the company understood that the true battle was invisible, a conflict of causality, of predestination, of belief. And in the fleeting moments before the final strike, a revelation sliced through his mind. Victory had always been possible, yet it had been defined not by courage or valor, but by forces that transcended even the Emperor's will. Above a ruined forge world, titanic void storms raged, tearing through orbital defenses and feeding upon the psychic anguish below. Tech priests labored to maintain machinery that bent reality itself, their augmetic limbs trembling under resonance they barely controlled. Sparks flew. Alarms screamed. The machinery's hum carried the echo of every decision ever made, every sacrifice, every act of devotion manipulated into service for a design beyond mortal reckoning. As the storm converged, a wave of comprehension struck. The Imperium itself was a lattice of obedience, faith, and blood, shaped across millennia by forces neither human nor divine. Servitors continued their work, oblivious, and the tech priests realized that failure or success mattered little. The universe would bend outcomes according to a will hidden, patient, eternal. And in the center of the forge, a device pulsed with unholy rhythm, awaiting the culmination of centuries of sacrifice, for the moment when revelation and action would collide. On a battlefield of ash and shattered stone, a lone commissar moved through ranks of soldiers whose fear had hardened into grim acceptance. Each man and woman carried the weight of choice, the memory of orders obeyed and ignored, the silent guilt of survival. Bolter fire erupted. Artillery fell. Marines, guardsmen, and psychers collided in a storm of metal and light. Each life lost reverberated across the battlefield, every act of courage mirrored by the consequences of failure. The commissar's eyes, once steady, reflected not triumph but comprehension of the cost. Obedience had become a crucible, devotion a weapon, and every decision a fracture in the lattice of reality. The ground itself seemed alive, reacting to the will of millions of souls, bending to the resonance of duty, fear, and faith. And above the roar, a distant psionic pulse hinted at the ultimate revelation, the culmination of centuries of sacrifice, about to strike the galaxy itself. Within a shattered orbital spire, scholars and psychers observed the convergence of energy and will. Ancient artifacts thrummed, each pulse echoing across light years, tugging at minds with a resonance older than the stars. Knowledge beyond comprehension revealed itself in fragments, manipulations that spanned millennia, betrayals sewn into faith itself, and the machinery of the Imperium's devotion orchestrated with subtlety beyond mortal reckoning. A scholar's hand hovered over a relic, trembling, as a vision forced itself into consciousness, that every war, every oath, every prayer unanswered had not been random. The revelation struck like a bolt across the psyche. Obedience and faith were instruments, manipulated across eons to serve a design that transcended both human and divine intention. And as the spire shuddered under the psychic storm, each observer realized that the universe had shifted irrevocably, its lattice reconfigured, and nothing would ever be the same again. On a throne world's surface, orbital bombardments erupted in unison, each explosion a punctuation to centuries of faith, obedience, and manipulation. Soldiers, priests, and warriors braced against the shockwaves, hearts hammering, minds fracturing under the weight of cosmic revelation. Bolters roared, chainswords bit into armor and flesh, and yet the true enemy was not visible. It was the lattice of causality, bending their every action, every prayer, every oath, toward outcomes hidden, eternal. The sky itself seemed to tremble. The galaxy breathed in silence, a tremor of quiet following the storm of fire and revelation. Stars glimmered through warp scars like distant lanterns, fragile against the immensity of nothingness. On a shattered throne world, spires collapsed into rubble, banners frayed and faded, and the echoes of prayers clung to broken stone. A lone remembrancer walked the streets, recording each ruin, each testament to devotion, courage, and despair. His quill scratched across vellum, ink blending with soot, a ritual to preserve memory where understanding had failed. The silence was both balm and accusation, a reminder that even in survival, nothing was restored. Dust floated through empty cathedrals, stirring faint images of angels and saints whose faces had been lost to time. And beneath the ruins, one question lingered like smoke. Is devotion still meaningful when its purpose has been twisted by powers beyond comprehension, when loyalty itself has been measured against eternity? On a battlefield long since cooled, bolters and chainswords lay silent, corroded by acid rains and neglect. The dead remained, not in heroic poses but collapsed, disfigured, and anonymous, their valor subsumed into a quiet futility. Smoke curled from the wreckage of shattered tanks and shattered faith, and among the rubble, a few survivors trudged, broken but unyielding. They carried the weight of memory in eyes hollow yet unbowed, the cost of obedience marked in every scar. Overhead, orbital platforms hung like silent judges, their once mighty guns now inert, reflecting the dim light of distant stars. The air was heavy with the scent of ash and time, a reminder that even the most fearsome conflict leaves only shadows. And as the remembrancer recorded their passage, he whispered the unanswerable. Can survival alone justify the horrors endured? Or does the memory of what was lost demand more than mere endurance? In the remnants of a cathedral world, pews splintered and icons shattered, the marble floors worn smooth by centuries of devotion, now covered in dust. Candles flickered long dead, their smoke still lingering as if memory itself burned. Priests, aged and gaunt, knelt among ruins, their chants muted by absence, carrying the echo of faith fraying at the edges. Walls bore the scars of psychic storms, their murals peeled and warped, yet traces of angels and saints remained, whispering impossible comfort. The remembrancer traced symbols with gloved fingers, pausing over those that seemed untouched by time or decay. Here, devotion was both witness and casualty, a fragile persistence against the entropy of memory. He asked in silence whether faith retained meaning when its guidance had failed, when prayers had gone unanswered, and when obedience had been twisted into instruments of forces unseen. The wind carried a final lament, stirring dust into patterns that seemed almost purposeful. On a frozen forge world, machines once sacred now rusted in silence, their augmatics lifeless, their hum extinguished. Tech priests lingered among the hulks, murmuring prayers to the Omnissiah that no longer answered, documenting the last labor of hands that trembled with history. Sparks long vanished, circuits corroded, and the silence pressed heavier than steel. Servitors slumped against walls, cogs jammed and voices gone, relics of devotion now monuments to futility. Outside, the snow fell, erasing footprints and bleeding memory into white. The remembrancer paused, watching the wind lift soot and dust into spiraling patterns, as if even the elements sought to record or mourn what had been lost. And he asked, when labor, faith, and vigilance all fail to preserve purpose, what remains to sustain the living? Only the echo of effort, the fragile record of those who endured, and the quiet testament of remembrance, faint yet unyielding against time's erasure. Across a shattered hive world, towers once gleaming fell into ruin, corridors crumbled, and the populace either fled or perished. The streets were littered with relics, banners, and the hollowed forms of those who had served loyally, their devotion unclaimed by history. A few survivors wandered in silence, eyes wide with memory, each carrying the invisible scars of obedience. The remembrancer followed them, quill scratching across pages, capturing fragments of testimony in a chronicle no one else would read. Above, the sky reflected the muted glow of distant stars, casting shadows on ruined rooftops, an eternal witness to what the galaxy had endured. And as the wind rattled through broken windows and collapsed domes, one thought lingered. Can the memory of those who fell, the record of deeds both heroic and meaningless, endure longer than the silence that follows destruction? Or will all efforts be absorbed into the void, leaving only questions behind? On a void cruiser drifting between dead systems, the hum of machinery was the only companion. Corridors stretched like tombs, lights flickered, and the few remaining crew moved as ghosts. Data logs preserved orders, logs of campaigns, and records of faith, yet their meaning was hollow against the enormity of loss. The Remembrancer traversed the decks, noting each detail: the scorched floors, the empty bunks, the shattered armories. He wrote of devotion turned to silence, of duty now preserved only in ink and memory. Outside the hull, stars glimmered coldly, untouched by the suffering within. The question remained: when all action ceases, when the galaxy holds no witness beyond dust and paper, what meaning remains for those who survive? The void seemed to answer with indifferent gleam, reflecting both insignificance and endurance, leaving only the quiet knowledge that remembrance itself may be the sole resistance against eternal oblivion. Within a ruined monastery orbiting a shattered sun, acolytes and surviving scribes traced their hands across cracked tomes, preserving chants that no longer summoned divinity. The walls carried scorches of psychic storms, murals peeled away, yet fragments of angels' faces smiled faintly from stone. The Remembrancer observed, recording not explanations, but impressions: the dust, the silence, the lingering scent of burnt incense. A single candle sputtered, smoke curling like a hesitant spirit, as if reluctant to vanish entirely. Outside, the sun dimmed beneath cosmic ash, casting faint luminescence over spires that once proclaimed heaven. And he wrote, in stillness, when devotion survives only in memory, and faith exists as a record rather than an act, is belief a comfort or a chain? He left the question unresolved, letting it drift with dust motes through the ruins, unanswerable yet eternal, a quiet testament to what had been endured and what could never be reclaimed. Across desolate battlefields, skeletal banners fluttered weakly in the wind, tattered edges singing a mournful hymn. The dead lay in haphazard rows, weapons half buried in ash, and scorch marks glimmered like scars on the earth. The Remembrancer moved among them, cool recording names, deeds, and fragments of dialogue whispered before final breaths. Survivors lingered at the edges, staring blankly, carrying memories too heavy to share. Each footstep stirred dust. Each turning of a page reminded them of impossible choices and lives extinguished in obedience. The sky reflected the void left behind, silent and immense, as if the universe itself acknowledged the scale of endurance and the futility of answers. And in that stillness, one final question lingered: is survival itself a victory, or merely a continuation of unacknowledged suffering, a quiet endurance that will be forgotten by time and gods alike? In the husk of a thrown world, crumbling spires cast elongated shadows over empty squares. The few remaining inhabitants moved like whispers through streets cracked by psychic storms and bombardment. Bells hung silent in towers, their echoes carried only in memory. The Remembrancer traced murals, scattered scrolls, and faded inscriptions, noting the faces of saints, heroes, and martyrs long gone. The wind carried ash and dust, turning each fragment into a fleeting dance of light and shadow. Every image, every relic, preserved in ink and memory, bore testimony to devotion, courage, and the irrevocable cost of survival. Yet the question lingered, like smoke in stone corridors. What remains when the act of endurance outlasts understanding? When history records only fragments of lives sacrificed to causes larger than comprehension, and when the echoes of faith continue without reply? The answer, he knew, would never come. On a frozen forge world, augmetic servitors rested inert, sparks gone, and machinery silent. Tech priests lingered, their fingers tracing circuits that no longer responded, documenting rituals whose efficacy had faded into legend. Outside, snow-covered footprints and scorch marks, erasing evidence of both triumph and catastrophe. The Remembrancer moved slowly, quill scratching against vellum, noting the silence itself as an artifact. The machines, the priests, and the dust all bore witness to devotion's endurance and its fragility, an elegy without voice. Questions hovered. When all labor, all obedience, all effort exists only in memory, does it preserve meaning, or does it fade into nothingness, a ghostly testament to endeavors abandoned? The snow fell endlessly, carrying both ash and remembrance across barren streets. The quiet of the world itself seemed to answer in the only language left: observation, endurance, and the fragile hope that memory could resist total oblivion.